blue collar crime guy. Hey, Michael, Brendan, Jamie, and Matt. And Mindy. It's Tim from Boston, the disabled veteran who called yesterday about discrimination against low-income Medicare recipients like myself. I hope that some of my fellow MR beauties can do some enlightened academic work around this issue of the impact of class on Medicare users, healthcare access, and outcomes. Thanks so much for everything you do. It's mitzvah-licious. Please consider letting Jamie host. Hopefully, Michael doesn't redirect the conversation based on my I am name today, Ronald Reagan, Baba Booey, Baba Booey.
I mean, I'm down whenever. Just throwing it out there. It might be a little messy at first. I would have to tone down some of my anti-capitalist rhetoric, but I have a lot of experience writing for mainstream publications.
Here's Jamie.
And I would do it.
So Sam gets a 3-day work week, and here's Jamie in a year. Welcome back to the Majority Report. I'm Jamie Peck. 1981. There's a Russian oligarch named Patricy Nabrotsov. But he wasn't an oligarch yet. He was a communist official. And he was interested in real estate. Who did he meet in those years? Donald Trump. Which brings us to tonight's question. This is a really serious question. Does Russia own the United States government? Russia.
Oh my God. If my mom is watching right now, she just had a joy-gasm because probably two of her favorite things in this world are me and Rachel Maddow.
And she would just like you to become Rachel Maddow.
Absolutely.
To the reference to the white collar crime family, I do think and the email we just had, I think that's the sliver of people who understand the zero-sum gameness and see wait, there's some wealth that's been generationally transported into people's pockets that don't really deserve it, and then it's going to be redistributed into more egalitarian lines.
Right.
I could see why that makes a lot of people nervous.
Well, no, that's the bigger read on it. I mean, that's because, again, South Africa is a obvious and glaring example of the economic and moral necessity of that. But this has implications for everything, right? There's a lot of people sitting on a lot of unearned wealth that needs to be taken from them. And actually, all bullshit aside, I don't want violently. And I say it from a number of perspectives, including actually studying places where, it probably had to happen that way, frankly. But it didn't lead to good, there's a lot of innate problems in what happened in Cuba. I'm not interested in romanticizing it or glossing it over. But also, on the flip side, that needed to happen. You know what? Batista needed to not run that country as a playground for the CIA and the mafia. There needed to be a change. And yes, it is actually better. And I'm not suggesting there's no historical endpoint. One thing is these conversations, people's imaginations are so limited in terms of the improvements that we can create. But there's no doubt that yes, broadly speaking, it seems that some fusion of broad universal delivery of resources and really serious liberal protections of people's individual and group rights in a positive sense of liberal, yes, those produce the best outcomes. That type of synthesis is going to be what we're looking for.
Yep. And as we saw with the Carnation Revolution, not all revolutions have to be violent.
Not at all.
And it's better when they're not.
And in a modern context, just even programmatically and practically from the left, they're not going to be in places like the United States. Again, it was a conversation all the time. Who has the weapons? Who has state resources? That ain't how it's going to be. If there was some type of revolutionary moment in the United States that was left forward, which I think it's fair to call Occupy a revolutionary moment in that sense. It was a mass uprising. It was across the country. It had a lot of things going for it.
It's revolution adjacent.
It's revolution adjacent.
Well, the way these things happen, the way that it would happen in the U.S. without violence is what Spencer Rapone is always talking about, which is getting the army on the side of the people through radicalization, political work, class consciousness. And there's a lot of potential for class consciousness in the quote unquote all volunteer military because so many people are there due to economically coercive conditions.
The National Review put, I can't remember what the quote was, but there's an Orwell quote being like, have a gun on the wall, right?
Yep.
And Orwell's, this full context of that was Orwell encouraging the left and socialists to infiltrate those sorts of those home defense programs.
Yes. And by the way,
shout out to anybody doing that.
Shout out to anybody doing that. And I know some people are going to, first of all, I think that that's true, that there's an audience in the army for those ideas. And I also think and white nationalists and Nazis are doing that. So are you going to dismiss the potentiality of trying that same approach when you already know that the worst, most dangerous people in the society, as documented by it was a big controversy in Obama, but Homeland Security, they documented this. And it's been that is a proven, reported thing, that those groups specifically go into the military and definitely in police departments for that type of training. So why on earth wouldn't you go in with, I'm not talking about paramilitary training. I'm talking about hey, what's your class background that probably did lead you to the military? That's a real conversation. And also in a positive sense, I've talked to, and we had a caller who was like, yeah, I became left wing when I was in the military because the military is a socialist system. It paid for my healthcare, education, and there's actually some really incredibly positive, cross-cultural human camaraderie here in a really positive sense.
That's the light, really.
Yeah.
That you hope people begin to see beyond just the blind patriotism and nationalism that exists within it.
To reference one more anti-Stalinist Marxist, C.L.R. James and Black Jacobins, which everybody should read.
Everybody's got to read that.
At the top of your list. The rich are only defeated when running for their lives.
That's right. That's right.
Whether the violence catches up to them or not is
that's an incident.
Secondary.
Secondary. It's second order. You're calling from a 703 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?